terrorized the streets of London's East End for 3 months in the autumn of 1888. He did this by killing and then butchering 5 women, at least. This brief murder spree earned the killer the most infamous of nicknames, Jack the Ripper. According to the legend, he did his killing dressed as a gentleman, wrote taunting letters, then suddenly stopped killing and vanished into the London fog. More than a century after the crimes, the Ripper's identity is still a mystery, and people are still coming up with suspects.
Walter Sickert had begun his life as an actor, and if you want to suppose that he was Jack the Ripper, he just created the greatest role on earth.
Today, modern investigative techniques are being applied to a 100-year-old mystery. But will they bring us any closer to identifying the killer? Or will Jack the Ripper continue to taunt us from beyond the grave? In the space of just under 3 months, he murdered at least 5 women. His habit of carving up his victims afterwards earned him the nickname Jack the Ripper, and the reputation of being the most notorious serial killer of all. According to most of the experts, the killing spree started on Friday the 31st of August, 1888. The gin houses were open. These were gathering places for women the newspapers called unfortunates. Women who would earn a few pennies in return for sexual favors, then spend them on a bed in a flop house or another glass of beer. One of those women was 42-year-old Mary Ann Nichols, Polly to her friends. We don't know exactly how she spent her last few hours, but wherever she was and whatever she was doing, Polly Nichols was about to walk into history. Early on Friday morning, a laborer on his way to work discovered the body of a woman, still warm, lying against a wall in Box Row. He couldn't tell if she was dead or alive and went off to find a policeman. Moments later, a bobby on patrol also came upon the body and determined that the woman was dead. A doctor was summoned to examine her before she was carted off to the morgue. The examining doctor determined that Polly Nichols had been strangled, then her throat was slit, and someone had gone to work on her with a knife.
He slit me throat twice, from left to right. Then he slashed me abdomen about half a dozen times.
The brutality of the crime shocked the public at the time and continues to shock us today, when interest in Jack the Ripper seems almost as intense as at the time of the murders.
There are literally more than a dozen books published every year about Jack the Ripper.
One of the reasons for the fascination is that nobody knows who done it. The identity of Jack the Ripper is just as much a mystery today as it was in 1888. Over the years, there have been dozens of suspects. Most recently, a famous British artist named Walter Sickert. Crime author Patricia Cornwell is the leading exponent of Sickert as the Ripper, and she's written a best-selling book on her investigation. A chance meeting with a Scotland Yard official named John Grieve spurred her interest in the case.
And I said, well, has anybody applied modern science to this case? Because it appears, according to you, there are hundreds of documents that the Ripper allegedly sent to the police. He said, no, nobody's ever done modern science on this. So I said, well, that might be kind of fun to fool around with.
That fooling around turned into an investigation that's lasted years and cost Cornwell a small fortune. Some of that's been spent on her collection of items from the Ripper era, which includes weapons the killer might have used.
In my opinion, the most likely candidate for the sort of knife Jack the Ripper used was your good old dagger. This gives you a grip, and then you've got this to stop your hand from slipping. And I don't mean to be gruesomely graphic, but if you're, stabbing with this, or if you're cutting and slashing with this, or you're doing someone's throat with this, this is multi-purpose. It's strong, it's double-edged, and you're protecting your own self.
Cornwell wanted to apply modern investigative techniques to an old mystery. Techniques that include forensic psychology and criminal profiling.
Psychological investigation or behavioral investigation cannot tell you who did it, but it can help you draw a picture of what type of person did it and what type of person probably didn't do it. There's no question that murders such as Jack the Ripper, BTK, Ted Bundy, and the rest of them of that type are sexually motivated, compulsive, repetitive, serial killing, where the individual has an inner drive, an inner compulsion to kill, and he eventually does, after years of fantasy about it.
No one knows exactly how many people Jack the Ripper killed. But in Ripper lore, the generally accepted number of victims is 5. Polly Nichols, Annie Chapman, Liz Stride, Catherine Eddowes, and Mary Kelly. Martha Tabram is sometimes listed as the first Ripper victim, but not always. Her body had been found in Whitechapel 3 weeks earlier, dead from multiple stab wounds. The Victorian press linked her death and another murder committed that spring with the brutal slaying of Polly Nichols. 8 days after Polly Nichols was brutally slain in Whitechapel, Annie Chapman walked into her backyard on Hanbury Street with Jack the Ripper. He strangled her, lowered her to the ground next to a fence, and slit her throat. Then he began to disembowel her.
He cut out most of my bladder. He cut out my uterus. Then he cut out my vagina and took it away with him.
At the morgue, the body was propped up and a photograph was taken. As news of this latest killing spread, the public demanded an arrest, and they already had their favorite suspects. Mostly foreigners, Jews, and neighborhood bullies. Patricia Cornwell thinks that the real killer would have seen this tabloid invention unfold.
He was watching this whole circus, reading it in the newspapers. Sickert was known to have read up to 10 newspapers a day.
Patricia Cornwell's investigation of Walter Sickert and his alleged connection to the Ripper murders didn't start out as a science project. It began with his paintings and her admittedly unscientific reaction to them.
I looked at some of his artwork and immediately my hair sort of stood on end. One thing that struck me is that a lot of the artwork, the women in it, who are all grotesque, they look dead.
Although Sickert is known for his landscapes, he also painted pictures with titles like Jack the Ripper's Bedroom and the Camden Town Murder.
His favorite sitters or models for his artwork were prostitutes. He once made the comment, "You keep the chorus girls, give me the hags." The uglier, the better.
And there was perhaps no better place to find them than the streets of Whitechapel. Meanwhile, 3 weeks passed without another murder by the unknown assailant the newspapers were still calling the Whitechapel Killer. But all that changed on the 27th of September, when the Central News Agency received a provocative letter. "Dear Boss," it began. Then came a series of taunts and threats, and it was signed, "Yours truly, Jack the Ripper." With that perfect phrase, the legend of the first modern serial killer was born. police and press received hundreds of letters claiming to be from Jack the Ripper, written in many different kinds of handwriting on many different kinds of paper, and mailed from many different cities around the country. To Cornwell, the Ripper letters reveal that whoever wrote them was following the murders closely and was compelled to comment on them, traits that appear to fit Walter Sickert.
He was a letter writer to the point that it was an obsession, writing letters to people and writing letters to the editors of newspapers. What, quote, Jack the Ripper does in his letters is he argues in many cases with what is in the news. Clearly, this person's reading a lot of news accounts, and he's mocking the police, he's threatening to do more. These are not cutesy letters. They're very vile, they're very clever, they're very taunting.
Cornwell thought she detected Sickert's hand in many of the Ripper letters, but that still didn't put him at a crime scene. In fact, one of the criticisms leveled at Cornwell's theory is that Sickert wasn't even in London at the time of the murders.
We have reams of evidence. We have several different letters from various sources during September and October of 1888, which place Sickert in France during at least 4 of the 5 murders.
Nobody has shown me a document that proves that, for example, on the night of one of these homicides that we know about, that he absolutely was some other.
Sickert's artwork as to where he was at the time of the murders. There's a London music hall sketch dated 29th of September, but no year is given, which is unfortunate, because what's known in Ripper law as the night of the double event occurred in the early hours of the 30th of September, 1888. About an hour after midnight, a cart turned into and the pony pulling it suddenly stopped. The driver saw a woman's body on the ground and lit a match to make sure it wasn't his wife. It wasn't. The victim was a prostitute named Liz Stride. She'd been dead for less than a few minutes when she was found. Her throat had been slit, but that was all.
Her throat was slashed in a way that's somewhat similar to Jack the Ripper, but no mutilations took place. And this is one of the reasons why Elizabeth Stride is not always considered to be a Ripper victim. Some people say it was completely unrelated. Others believe that Jack the Ripper was interrupted.
Less than an hour after someone slit Liz Stride's throat, someone did the same thing to Catherine Eddowes. And this time, the throat was only the beginning.
He slit my throat, cut open my abdomen, and pulled out my intestines. He sliced through my uterus and left kidney, which he took with him.
He was mutilating the hell out of them and grabbing organs and throwing their intestines out of the way.
With the murders of Liz Stride and Catherine Eddowes on the same night, the Ripper case became a worldwide sensation.
By this time, the first and second week of November 1888, the Jack the Ripper murders were in every newspaper, not only in London, not only all over the UK, but around the world.
Letters claiming to be from the Ripper continued to show up at newspapers and police stations, including one that arrived with a body part.
It was accompanied by half a human kidney, which the writer obviously claimed came from Catherine Eddowes, whose left kidney had been taken.
That particular letter has been lost, but hundreds of others are being kept in Britain's National Archives, where forensic paper analyst Peter Bauer had the chance to study them, looking for similarities to Walter Sickert's work. And one piece of Ripper correspondence caught Bauer's attention.
This is a Ripper letter, and it has a curious guillotined edge.
This slanted edge is unlike the typical 90-degree angle achieved in most batch cuts.
Looking amongst the Gurney ivory-laid papers used by Sickert, we find the same characteristics.
There's the same angled edge and the same watermark. The watermark on the Ripper letter appears to match the watermark on the Sickert letter.
Every detail of these sheets says to me that they came from the same batch of paper.
For sure, at least some of these letters were written by the same person, because the likelihood of two different people writing letters on paper that came from the same roll from one batch is pretty improbable.
Handwriting analysis was another obvious approach, and for that, Cornwell turned to experts in Tennessee. Senior research scientist Ralph Dinwiddie joined forces with John Williams, a forensic trainer, to investigate. Dinwiddie and Williams went to work isolating Sickert's recurring character combinations, and then compared them to formations found in the Ripper samples.
The word U in the Sickert document has several unique characteristics. You notice the way the Y is formed. It almost looks like a sideways S. The O is open at the top. And you go right into the U, which is a nice little squiggle. If we come over to the Ripper document and look at one of the versions of the word U here, again, you see the Y that looks like a sideways S. The O is open at the top, and we go right in at the top to form the squiggle of the U. Very similar characteristics.
Between probably 10 of the Ripper documents, we've made some comparisons with the known Walter Sickert documents, and we see some very good consistencies there. It certainly raises the suspicion of this being the same person.
Though not everyone accepts Cornwell's research results, it seems possible, even likely, that Walter Sickert wrote at least some of the Ripper letters. That makes him a prankster with a bit of a morbid streak. But what does Patricia Cornwell think makes him a killer? The month of October came and went without another killing. So did the first week of November. Then, shortly before noon on the 9th of November, a man named Thomas Bowyer paid a visit to Mary Kelly's boarding room to collect her overdue rent money. The door was locked, but through a window, Bowyer was confronted by a hellish scene. Mary Kelly was lying on a bed, ripped to pieces.
He butchered me, just like I was a pig or a rabbit.
He actually skinned approximately 30 or 40% of her body, removed huge chunks of flesh, removed her breasts, removed her organs. He also removed the heart, which was never done for any previous Ripper victim.
But no matter who the killer was, most students of the Ripper case agree that there was a sexual component to his acts.
In sexual serial murder cases, there's a fusion of sex and aggression so that the aggressive act itself is eroticized. That he wants to arouse himself. He wants to stimulate himself. He's developed, for whatever multiple reasons there are, an arousal pattern where violence and sadism is stimulating.
Today, we know that sexual killers often suffered some traumatic event in childhood, something that shaped the way the sex drive developed. And Cornwell thinks she spotted something in Walter Sickert's childhood that might well qualify as traumatic.
There have been several mentions in biographical works that he had 3 surgeries by the time he was 5 for something called a fistula, which is basically like an abscess or some kind of hole that's not supposed to be there. And it had to have been very serious because the conditions back in those days were so grim and so dangerous. You didn't risk surgery unless it was profoundly important.
Cornwell asked Sickert's nephew about it.
I said to him one day, I've read a number of things about your uncle having a fistula. What was that? And he said, oh, he had a hole in it. He was born with a hole in his penis. And I went, oh. And I thought, that ain't good.
Many historians dispute this version of the story, pointing out that Sickert visited a prominent rectal surgeon for his fistula, not a urologist. But if Cornwell's story is true, the surgeries were probably an attempt to reroute the urethra, a difficult task even today. Cornwell believes that Walter Sickert grew to manhood hiding a secret genital deformity, something unspeakable, so that ever since childhood there was the public Walter Sickert and the private one. And Cornwell believes that in the summer of 1888, the private one took over.
That was the summer that Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde opened on the London stage. And it was a sensation on stage and incredibly provocative in terms of getting people to talk about this very thing, about people looking like something they're not or being something they don't look like.
2 months before Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde closed, someone picked up Martha Taberham and stabbed her 39 times. Cornwell thinks it was Walter Sickert, unleashing his own Mr. Hyde.
These types of killers, their violence usually escalates.
It would make a lot of sense to me that Jack the Ripper would start not necessarily by disemboweling her, but by stabbing, getting some degree of comfort with his weapon.
Martha Taberham was last seen with a man in uniform.
We don't know that that was Jack the Ripper, but it was the last person she was seen with, and Sickert did have a fetish for uniforms.
3 weeks later, Polly Nichols had her throat slit, and the mutilation started.
This was the first murder of the series where Jack the Ripper's MO was really sort of on display. Some of her insides, I think part of her intestines, were actually exposed, but no organs were taken away.
Then came Annie Chapman, disemboweled with some of her organs removed. 3 weeks later came the double event, where Catherine Eddowes had a kidney removed and her face carved up.
You have this progression of Jack the Ripper's victims, just the violence being committed on them is just increasing, like almost exponentially.
And finally, a murder indoors, where the Ripper could take his time and Mary Kelly's heart. With the killing of Mary Kelly, the Ripper murders are thought to have stopped. But Cornwell doesn't think that that's the case.
What your Ripper theorists tend to ignore, and the public ignored and the police ignored back during the same period, is that torsos began to turn up.
Cornwell believes that Walter Sickert continued to kill people on and off for the next several years, if not decades. And she plans to keep looking for hard scientific evidence to prove it.
As long as new evidence potentially comes in, this will always knock on my door, probably for the rest of my life. And I don't believe that you're an honorable person if you start something you don't finish.
But Cornwell's skeptics don't believe she's even remotely on the right track.
The whole of Patricia Cornwell's case is a house built on sand, unfortunately, because her case solely rests on the fact that some or one of the letters must be genuinely from the killer. In fact, it's very likely every single letter we have, allegedly from Jack the Ripper, is a contemporary hoax. They weren't written by the killer at all.
It's doubtful we'll ever know what really happened during the Ripper's 3-month murder spree, or who the Ripper really was. While we wait for some miraculous breakthrough, we continue to be disturbed and fascinated by what took place in London's East End over a century ago.
Ohjelman tarjoaa